Hello and welcome. For those of you who are avid listeners of the continuous call team on 2GB during those winter months, you know the voice of Mark Levy. Mark Levy's the one who gives his colleagues a hard time during the show. Mark Levy also started his career at Royal Randwick, and then he progressed through Sky Channel to the position he holds now. What you might not realise is that Mark Levy was once a housemate of top jockey Tim Clark. I caught up with Mark this week and asked him, can he relay some of the funny stories from his show on the continuous call team? Mark Levy, thanks for joining us.
Stevie, it feels like I've joined the Michael Parkinson of the racing world. How are you, buddy?
Yourself?
Mate, I'm very, very well. Excited for what we're about to talk about.
Well, we are going to talk about a bit of life, like your life story. And one of the first times I met you was at Sky Channel. How did you find your way to Sky Channel?
Well, my racing journey actually started here at Royal Randwick. My dad's best mate's a guy by the name of Charlie Stramides, who was the on-course operations manager for the Tab, which virtually looked after all the little ladies on the tote. And what my first job was to carry the money around to the tote ladies when they needed it for the big payouts for all the big punters, and fix their machines when their buttons weren't working and all that sort of thing. So it started right here.
Right here at Royal Randwick. And you moved to Sky Channel as a producer and presenter?
Yeah, more so a producer at first. So walking around here, you got to meet the likes of Ian Craig and Chris Kearns, who was doing the on-course stuff for Sky Channel at the time, and I was just fascinated by all the cameras and the lights, a little bit much like your setup here today. Yeah. And I said to Chris Kearns, I said, "Are you there? Any chance I could come over and have a look at Sky Channel?" And as soon as I walked into one of those control rooms and saw all the monitors and the lights and the presenters, I just thought, I think this is what I want to do. It was either that or become a paramedic. Yeah. I went to a party, a mate of mine vomited and I vomited, and I thought, I might stick with the media, eh?
Mate, you found your way to 2GB from Sky Channel, but in between times, you were flatting with Tim Clark, the jockey. How did that go?
Yeah, memorable experience, more so for him rather than me. I spent most of my time down at the Coogee Bay Hotel and the Palace, or whatever they call it these days. But yeah, no, I actually did a story on Tim and his brother at Gundagai at the Snake Gully Cup, and his brother Brad said to me, look, Tim's going to move up to Sydney. I think he was indentured to, his first boss was John O'Shea from memory. And as you know, apprentices come to Sydney, they all of a sudden see all this money, they see all the lights of the city, and some of them go off the rails, and Brad said, just on the quiet, make sure Timmy stays on the straight line. I said, I don't think you're talking to the right person. Anyway, so he moved to Sydney, and we just became mates, and went out on Saturday nights. He had his one drink and was falling off the stool, and I was out there for 10. But it's great to see him kicking goals, and I think he's probably one of the most underrated jockeys in Sydney at the moment.
You must have had some influence on him. He's turned out to be a Group 1 winning jockey and one of the top 10 in Sydney, you'd have to say.
Well, it's funny, Steve. I'll tell you a funny story. So Thursday nights inevitably was a night where he'd do it a bit tough, preparing for the races Saturday, so he'd watch his diet and the like. So you know what I'd do? I'd go down to the local Coles, I'd buy a big leg of lamb, I'd put the roast dinner in, so I'd have the baked potatoes, the pumpkin, and I'd serve myself up. And then I'd get one of those little saucers where you put the coffee cup on, I'd put a pea, half a potato, and a really tiny bit of meat. So there you go, Clarky, there's your dinner. He never lets me live it down.
So in your time in the racing industry, what do you reckon your best horse you saw?
Best horse I saw, I loved watching Lonhro. One of my favourite races I ever saw him run in was that Australian Cup and that memorable call of Greg Miles, and every time I still hear it, and I replay it on air these days, and I still get goosebumps. It was just an incredible call, an incredible horse, and I'm lucky to be mates with Darren Beedman these days and his son Mitch, and we sometimes sit there and wax lyrical about the great horses that he had an association with, but I think Lonhro's probably one of my favourites.
And your favourite jockey?
Favourite jockeys would have to be the Dazzler. I love Darren Beedman. And then Hugh Bowman, I think what Hugh Bowman's done for racing is just phenomenal. And I'll give him a rap. Throughout the Winx's journey, he never knocked me back for one interview. The same with Chris Waller, and I think that's important to acknowledge, because what they did, not only for the racing industry, but for the wider community that were just, in awe of this horse and this journey, was just phenomenal. So I take my hat off to them both.
Well, not only that, the pressure that those guys must have been under leading into those important races, and in fact, the last race, and you're right, he never said no to me with any request that I had, whether it be a photograph, or he even came with us last year to the Sydney Children's Hospital, of which we visit every year with my mate Malcolm Fitzgerald. He was there with his daughters, so yeah, he gave himself to the public and the media, and it's worthwhile mentioning that. Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of the racing industry, Steve, and that's where I sort of owe a lot of my success to the racing industry. because you're mixing with people that have got their last $20 in their pocket, you're mixing with the middle class, and you're mixing with the elite. I mean, you know, I used to take money to the director's room at Royal Randwick, and I'd sit there with the girls on the tape, Denise and Leanne, and I said, oh, that's Nicole Kidman, and, you know, I just couldn't believe it. And now I'm getting invites into the director's room, and I say to the girls, I said, geez, we've gone full circle now, haven't we?
So you probably answered my next question, which is the best race. Are you still going to stick with the long row race?
Yeah, I think the Australian Cup. I loved watching Makybe Diva. There was, I think Makybe Diva won a BMW at Rose Hill, and I was there working on the day. And for some reason, that's another race that sticks in my mind because of the roar from the crowd and the like. So, yeah, I'd probably stick with the Australian Cup, but for some reason, that BMW at Rose Hill featuring Makybe Diva is another one.
Yep. Well, your role at GB gives you an opportunity to talk to a wide audience, and I listened to one of your comments the other day regarding the recent ABC program, and I agree with you that in your comments you made that the fact that we shouldn't toss out all of the good apples for a few bad apples, and yes, the footage that was shown on that ABC program is hard to digest, and you can't run away from it. But let's face it, a lot of these racehorse stables, and you've been in them and I've been in them, you very rarely see a bad, ill-treated horse or one that's having it really tough.
It's a topic that really riles me up, Steve, and I think I said on air at the time it pisses me off, and it does, and I hope you don't mind me saying that. Because you're right, I think we try and lump a few bad apples into the whole bunch. And I think if you look at any industry, whether it's the racing industry, whether it's the banking industry, although we've just had a Royal Commission, there are going to be bad apples. And for people to suggest that the racing industry is cruel to animals is just the biggest load of rubbish I think I've ever heard in my life. And I'm offended for the people that get up at 2 at 3 in the morning and give their guts for the horses, and they treat their horses better than they treat a member of their family. And, you know, I've still got friends that work in the racing industry, and, you know, I've got friends of mine that, and I told a story on 2GB the other week where I said, there's a bloke I know who the trainer was away, and the horse needed a new rug and it needed some other things for its box. So he went and spent $500 of his own money on that particular horse. He ate 2-minute noodles for the rest of the week until he was reimbursed by the trainer who was away at one of those country carnivals. Now, you tell me, Steve, that's cruelty to animals. It is a complete and utter rubbish. It's nonsense.
If you've ever been to one of those high boutique studs in the Hunter Valley, you'll realise that these horses are treated, like you say, better than some family members.
Yep.
With the royalty in the boxes that they get to live in, and they're cared for like gold, which they are, some of them. I mean, some of these horses, yes, they're serving 90 and 100 mares per season, but they're looked after, and they're well looked after.
And let's not forget as well, these horses we're talking about are bred to race.
Of course.
How many horses have you seen in the mounting yard in your role at the races? Okay, you might see a couple of them that are a little fractious and don't want to go onto the course, but when they get out there, they absolutely love it. And what horse wouldn't love it? They've got, 10, 20,000 people there on big days to watch the horse, the jockey and the trainer try and strive to what they want to achieve, and that's Group 1 success. So, again, it's one topic at the moment that really riles me up, and I was only at the Doncaster Hotel down the road from where we're sitting today talking to a few stable staff from Randwick. I was down there after the gong at Kembla Grange, caught up with Darren Flindell, the voice of Sydney Racing, and we were just started talking about it, and a couple of the stable staff had sort of pricked their ears, and they came over and joined in the discussion, and they said, thank you, hallelujah, somebody that actually sees and cuts through the BS. And when you talk about that ABC documentary, let's not forget that it was later proven that one of the horses that was central to that documentary isn't dead. It's alive and well in the northwest of Sydney. So I think we need to face facts.
The other thing I think that people don't quite understand is that they forget how much revenue that the racing industry brings over, and the employment throughout Australia. It is one of the biggest employers in this country.
I think someone told me, it may have been Peter Volandis that I heard say it's the second biggest employer in Australia, the racing industry. Because we're talking about stable staff, we're talking about truck drivers, we're talking about the people that deliver the food, make the food. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. The cleaning staff on big race days. I mean, all these people, and then you get the protesters that stand outside race courses. I said to one of them once, I said, what are you here to protest? They couldn't answer the question. They're here to protest about protesting. Ridiculous.
Now, mate,
you got me fired up, Steve.
Moving on now to your continuous call team.
Oh, this will be interesting.
Oh well, look at the stable you've got here: Hadley, Fulton, Broman, Riddell, Aaron Molan, and David Morrow, and there's probably more I haven't mentioned. But You must have some fun with that program.
We do. We're on air a long time together, for sometimes 10 hours together. But I've got to give the credit to my mentor and my boss, Ray Hadley, who first came up with the idea 33 years ago, and it's just been out of control ever since. Ray brings the control, and I must admit it's impossible shoes to fill when he's not there. But it's funny, I'm the youngest member of the team, and I'm supposed to control the likes of Broman and Molan and Piggy Riddell and David Thirsty Morrow. It's just impossible. But we go from talking about football for the first half an hour of the program, and then the next 9.5 hours is just absolute rubbish. We talk about the sex of capsicums, people's inability to merge on the roads, and I think that's why people enjoy it, because we get away from the politics, we get away from the serious rubbish in the world, and we just sit there, and it's built around a bar table without the beers. We just sit there and talk rubbish.
Well, I must admit there are some times when I nearly steer off the road in laughter when I'm listening to your programs on the way home from the races on a Saturday. And so that's the stuff that goes to air. I bet there's a lot of stuff that doesn't go to air that you can't repeat.
There's a lot of stuff that happens in the commercial breaks that we like to leave there. But it's funny, you talk about on the way home from the races, the amount of times we'll be there and getting ready to call the 5:30 game or the 7:30 game, and my mobile will go off with text messages from trainers. Gary Portelli's a big fan of the show. Thank you, Gaz. Chris Waller's a big fan of the show as well. But it's amazing. I mean, Chris and Gary, for all the success they've had, they just love hearing their names mentioned on the continuous call team. And then I've got to mention their staff and their wives and their kids. I said, boys, drop off. We've got to call the football.
Football. Do you have a favourite team? I know you're probably supposed to make the same impartial, but you must have a favourite team.
Well, I grew up a South Sydney supporter. My late dad was a South supporter, and when they were kicked out of the comp, I went to South Leagues Club with him and marched down Chalmers Street to the town hall and did all that sort of thing. So probably South Sydney has a soft spot in my heart, but now in my dealings with a lot of the clubs, I can't stand all of them. So no, they're good. But I don't really have a team, but I probably would have a soft spot for South if I was pressed on the matter.
Okay, so one of your favourite players must be a Souths player. Which one would that be?
Do you know my favourite player? And we're still mates, and I used to get him on the breakfast radio program. I had Mark Spud Carroll, and he still let me to go down to Spud's gym at Woolloomooloo. Got the plug in for you, Spud. He says to me, Levy, I'll get you fit. Yeah. I said, I know you'll get me fit, but I'm worried that you're going to kill me if I come down to your gym, because, as you know, one of the toughest men to play rugby league, but I just love the way he played. I love those origin battles. I just think they'll go into rugby league history and be there for a long, long time to come. So yeah, Spud's my favourite.
I think I already know the answer to my next question, which is your favourite game, which was, you mentioned the grand final of Jonathan Thurston kicking the field goal in Golden Point. Yeah, that was extraordinary. To think that they scored that try to level things up. He had the sideline conversion. I still remember it. It was on between the 20 and the 30 metre line on the western side of ANZ Stadium. And we're in the broadcast box looking down. The sideline conversion bounced off the upright. We went to Golden Point extra time. Ben Hunt dropped the ball, set up for the field goal. Thurston does what he does best, the match winner, and he wins North Queensland their grand final. Extraordinary. I've got goosebumps again. Love it. You must feel blessed for the job that you've got. I mean, the position sort of takes you. You've done Olympic Games, have you?
Yeah, I must say I've got to pinch myself, because I do work with some great broadcasters in Ray and David Morrow, who they've been calling racing and football and Olympic Games longer than I've been on this earth. So I think I've got to give them a lot of the credit for some of the success I've had, because when you learn from the best, you sort of pick up little bits and pieces along the way. I went to Beijing. That was my first Olympic Games with Ray. Then we went to London. Now I fill in for Ray on his morning show, where I've got to actually talk sense about politics and all these different things, which is a bit strange. And then the continuous call team and everything else we do.
But I must admit, I mean, I had listened to you when you filled in for Ray, and apart from the difference in the voice, the opinions are pretty much similar.
Yeah, well, like I say, I mean, I'm just a knockabout sort of bloke. I'm not the most intelligent person going around. I never went to university. And I think I have that common man sort of touch. Yeah. And I hope that's why people relate to what I've got to say, because the worst thing politicians do is they come on and they don't answer questions. And that drives me up the wall. And to the point where I just go, you're not answering the question. Yep. And then the amount of people that say to me, good on you, they weren't answering the question. Yeah. They just try and, muddle you up with figures and facts and all that sort of thing. Answer the question, and then we move on. Yeah. So that's the way I sort of treat things. I'm not the most intelligent, but I just take an everyday man's approach to all the issues we tackle.
Now, the blokes you just mentioned, David Morrow and Ray Hadley, as you say, they're race callers. Have you ever had a crack at a race ball?
I had a crack. It's funny, my stepdad sent me a couple of tapes of my race calls here, actually. Terry Boodle, who's now the judge, he set me up with some binoculars and a tape recorder, and Ian Craig had to listen to some of the calls as well. Let's just say pre-puberty, away they go. I'll leave it to the professionals, I think. It was good fun, but the amount of pressure they're under, and I know you've had Matt Hill on this particular interview and on your website. The way in which they conduct themselves and the way in which they do their job. If you can call a race, you can do anything. Well, I'm convinced of that.
How Matt Hill managed to compose himself to call his first Melbourne Cup, 24 runners around Flemington, and he even told me during the interview there's a section of the track where you can't see the field because there's marquees set up in the middle of the track. Yeah. So they go past, and I guess he's got to make it up for the seconds that have disappeared behind the marquee. That's a fantastic talent, absolutely fantastic talent.
Welcome to my world. I've been making it up for 20 years.
Well, speaking of your world, calling football is not easy either because A, they're not wearing race colours, B, you can't always see the number on their back, and C, it's hard to see which face is what. And the last one, we have an influx of Polynesian players, and some of the pronunciations of their names, they're tongue twisters.
I think the most enjoyable thing for me prior to a game of football is behind the broadcast boxes where all the media sort of congregates. Yeah. When you see Ray Warren and you see all the other broadcasters from the other stations and you say, Rabs, how are we saying the utility for the Melbourne Storm? I don't know, you idiots. Turn it up. How am I supposed to know? I've been calling Sivana Siva and I'm apparently with Thivana Thiva. But there's one bloke going around for Melbourne, Farmar Suamali Ali. Try spitting that out when you're calling the football. It's impossible, but you just do your best. And it's funny, you run into footballers these days at social functions. Moses Mbai is a funny one, even though it's not a very difficult name to say. We didn't know whether it was Mbai. And I said to him in a function, I said, mate, how do I say your name? He goes, how have you been saying it? I said, Mbai. He said, bang on. Yeah. But they're not really, they don't get too uppity about these sorts of things. Although, a funny story, Jordan Rapana for the Canberra Raiders. As soon as he made his debut, we were told to call him Jordan Rapana. Right. So for the next 3 years, we called him Jordan Rapana. We then got a message from his mum. No, I want him called Jordan Rapana. So every time you go to the football, you go, is it Rapana? Is it Rapana? And then I get into a bloody car and hear him voice a commercial. Hi, it's Jordan Rapana here from the Canberra Raiders. So you just get confused. So you just do your best. You just do your best.
Now, I pulled a couple of photos off your Facebook site. Here's one photograph of you drinking from a Melbourne Cup. Now, whose Melbourne Cup was it, and what were you drinking out of it?
We were drinking beer out of it, I think. That was Fiorente's Melbourne Cup. A mate of mine, Merwin Salama, he was one of the owners in Fiorente, and there was a whole heap of owners, and we had a barbecue, and he produced that at a barbecue at my place, and let's just say it was quite a big night. And I will say this, beer tastes extremely beautiful out of a Melbourne Cup.
I'm sure it does.
I drank out of the jockey's one as well, the Blake Shin one on View.
Yep.
His brother Ryan was working with me at Flemington on that particular day, and that was quite an interesting night. And then drinking out of that little cup was quite nice as well. But yeah, you don't get to do that every day.
No, you don't, and I reckon it would taste even better if it was your own Melbourne Cup.
Yes, it would. I'm probably the most successful racehorse owner in the world, Steve. I owned a horse. It had one start, one win, and then sadly broke down at Warwick Farm in track work. And I thought to myself, because the trainer rang me, Gary Neal, he said, why don't we get you another horse? I said, mate, I think I'm going to retire from racehorse ownership for the time being. Yeah. I've got a 100% strike rate. So, but it was good fun.
I'm surprised you're not into a few syndicates, given the fact that you 2GB have got plenty of racing people involved in it.
Oh, don't worry.
Wealthy racing people.
Oh, don't worry. I get hit up all the time.
Sure
if it's not Neil Breen from Channel 9, it's Matty Thompson from Channel 9 and Thirsty Morrow, who's got that many horses. Yeah. The thing about Thirsty, and I'll say this, I hope he doesn't watch it back, he's got all these horses that run around and he'll declare them. One's going to win the Slipper, one's going to win the Melbourne Cup. They end up running at Taree. So, look, that's the beauty about racing. You come across good ones, you come across bad ones, but just to be involved in the sport is good fun.
And can any of them in the studio tip? Ray Hadley, Alan Jones, can they?
Mark Riddell, Piggy Riddell thinks he's a good tipster, but he can't. He's hopeless. Jimmy Bartell, who I've spent a bit of time with lately, the AFL legend's a very good tipster. Yep. I don't know where he gets his mail from. Ray's pretty good, and Thirsty's mail's pretty good, but you sort of do your own thing. But one thing on the continuous call team is our crew are the greatest at tipping a winner after the race.
Of course.
So they hit the line, you're beauty, best bet of the day gets up. What? Where was my tip at 20-1? That's just what they're like.
What about tipping football? Are they any good at that?
Nah. No, you know what? Thinking about it, sitting here talking to you, Steve, we're not good at very much at all, actually. How we're employed is remarkable. No, we're all right at football, but you just don't know with football the way it changes, and I think that's the beauty of the National Rugby League lately. It's just been so open.
Yep.
It was great to see Canberra feature in the grand final, albeit with the controversial 6-again call.
Yes.
But, it just goes to show that it's not always going to be the Roosters and the Melbourne Storm that feature in grand finals.
No. And I guess looking forward to the new season coming on, what are you looking forward to most?
Hopefully getting the refereeing sorted out.
Oh, well, that's an ongoing saga, isn't it?
I saw Peter Volandis at the Gong last weekend, and I said, Pete, can we have a chat? He said, Mark, I know the referees, they do your head in. I said, come on, if there's one man that can fix it, it's you. So I just hope we get back to basics. I think we've made, and I feel for the referees, we've just made it so difficult for them to officiate in such a high pressure situation. They've got that much to worry about, people in their ears. Just let them get back to basics, and that's adjudicate what's in front of them. But look, for all those people that take pot shots at rugby league, in my view, it's the greatest game of all. It'll be there for a long, long time to come. And for people saying we're at the crossroads, I mean, we survived the Super League war, for goodness sake. So rugby league will continue to grow and prosper into the future, and I'm excited by what our new chairman can do, Peter Volandis, because put it this way, he couldn't be any worse than his predecessor, Peter B.
Well said, Mark, and on that note, I hope you have a wonderful new rugby league season and you prosper into the future as well. Thanks for joining us.
Good on you, Steve. Great to see you, mate.
Brad.